While most of us are well versed concerning the many benefits of EV ownership, there are still some EV conversations that we should be having a little more often. Welcome to our April 2024 episode of Canada Talks Electric Cars, brought to you by Electric Vehicle Society. Thanks for joining us on this, our 47th episode of the series. Our guest today is Danielle Breton, CEO of Electric Mobility Canada. Danielle is responsible for management of Electric Mobility Canada and leads the organization's advocacy initiatives to advance the electrification of transportation. He serves as EMC's media spokesperson and is a sought-after speaker on the topic of electric mobility. Feel free to submit questions for Danielle using the Q&A option on your Zoom toolbar at any time. And remember, you may also upvote other people's questions. If you see something there that you really want to make sure we get to, give it a little thumbs up and we'll be sure to address it. EMC's mission is similar to our own here at EV Society, which is to enable and accelerate the transition to sustainable electric mobility in Canada, with the ultimate goal of creating a cleaner and healthier future for all Canadians. Danielle joins us today to talk about some of the often overlooked financial and environmental benefits of EV ownership. And on that note, I'll invite Danielle to join in. Hi,
I think
Danielle. Great to see you. Great to see you.
good to see you.
Yeah, so you've been a busy fella lately, and I know that you've got an important couple of topics here that you want to get out and share with our audience, so that they can in turn take it out into the world and talk to their maybe non-EV knowledgeable friends.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
so with that, Danielle, I'm going to just get out of the way and let you have at it.
Well, before saying anything else, first, I want to thank you for the great work that you guys do at EV Society. Without EV owner groups, we wouldn't be where we are today. Let's face it, most times, I've been saying that for a long time, that people will often buy electric cars not because of the dealer, but in spite of the dealer.
Yeah.
Because a lot of them are not interested. They don't really know what they're talking about. So if it were not for you guys, uh, things were not going as fast as they are. Let's face
Well,
it.
it's great to have multiple groups all pulling in the same direction. Let's put it
Yeah,
that way. But I
yeah, exactly.
appreciate the comments. We have a lot of very dedicated and active volunteers right across Canada, and
Absolutely.
we appreciate them very much. So
Yeah,
thanks, Daniel.
yeah.
Appreciate that. All right.
So let's start with the good news of the day. So today was Manitoba's budget, and for the first time ever, the government of Manitoba will adopt. People will be able to have access to a $4,000 rebate on the purchase of an electric car, and $2,500 for the purchase of a used electric car. So I think this is great news because, I mean, in the prairies, things have been not that easy, as you know, because there's not a rebate in Alberta. There will be a tax in Alberta. Plus, there is already a tax in Saskatchewan. So that, to me, that goes against, common sense. But I mean, we've been dealing with that for a long time. But one more thing about the Manitoba budget. Listen to this. Qualifying purchases from October 1st, 2023 to March 31st, 2024 are eligible for a rebate. Meaning if somebody bought it after August 1st, 2023, they still can get a rebate in Manitoba. So,
Fantastic.
yeah, exactly. So, and obviously rebates, it says here, rebates will also be given to purchasers of EVs from April 1st, 2024 to March 31st, 2026. So this is great news.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Good stuff, Daniel. Thank you very much. I'll let you get out the screen share and do your thing.
Yeah. Okay, great. Let's do this. So just give me a second here. I hope it works. It's supposed to, normally.
I have faith. I have faith.
There we go. Can you see what I'm sharing?
Absolutely. Looks good.
Great.
Just go into play mode.
Okay, great. So, play mode. Am I okay here? That's it?
That's it.
Oh my God, huh? It's as if I knew what I was doing.
You can fool everybody, eh?
So listen, everyone. The reason why I'm very enthusiastic to talk about this today is because, um, well, it first started with me being angry because for 5 years, the federal government has not been talking about this. Uh, to my first slide, since March 2019, the federal fiscal deduction for new zero-emission passenger vehicle is offered for self-employed workers and business owners. After 5 years, the vast majority of car dealers, car manufacturers, consumers, and accountants still don't know about it. This means that tens of thousands of Canadians have left thousands of dollars on the table. I'll give you my example. So I bought an electric car in 2019. I was self-employed back then. I was not working at EMC. Because of this program, I got some GST back, PST back, income tax back, $21,000. $21,000. This is huge and nobody knows about it. I've been talking to the CEOs of different car companies. They were not aware of it. I've been talking to hundreds of car dealers. 99% of them don't know a thing about it. So this is why on March 28th, we did a special webinar on this. But I have to repeat it there because I've been talking to journalists about this. They don't know about it. They don't even share the information. So this is why I feel that this is very important. So what is a zero emission passenger vehicle? According to the government of Canada, it means that it's an automobile that is owned, well, automobile or light truck that is owned by the taxpayer and is included in class 54. That would be otherwise be included in class 10 or 10.1. That rules, it applies to the definition of passenger vehicles to zero emission passenger vehicles. And when I say zero emission passenger vehicles, I mean either battery electric car, plug-in hybrid electric car, or hydrogen car. So we're talking self-employed workers, or it also applies to businesses. So in 2022, there were 2.7 million self-employed workers and 1.2 million businesses in Canada. So we're talking potentially almost 4 million people that can take advantage of this program. So it is a big deal. So when I hear some car manufacturers or car dealers saying, electric cars are very expensive, people don't want to buy them, and I tell them about this program, they don't know about it. So they could take advantage of it. They could talk to their customers about it, but they don't. So this is the 2024 scenario. So these are the calculation, okay? So keep in mind, I am not an accountant. We hired an accountant to do these calculations. For a zero emission passenger vehicle, use 70% of the mileage for work. Meaning that if you do less, you get less money. If you do more mileage for work, you get more money. It says here purchase of an EV or a PHEV under 61 grand because this is the threshold. So anything under the 61 grand, not a problem. Above 61 grand, the limit for you to do the deduction is 61 grand. So if you buy a $75,000 electric car, you can only deduct up to 61 grand. So if you look at the numbers, so what you're seeing here is that people can get, on average in Canada, if you make $50,000 net revenue a year, average across Canada, $8,700. If you make $100,000, average across Canada is 10,652. And if you make 230,000, it could get you approximately across Canada 13,165. So this is a big deal. Look at these numbers. New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, PEI. In Ontario, where there is no provincial rebate, with this, you can get anywhere between $9,000 and almost $15,000 on the purchase of an electric car. It has to be purchased. It has to be a new car if you are self-employed or own a business. Obviously, these are calculations done with these parameters, but if you make $75,000, it's between it, the money that you'll get back is going to be between $9,000 and $11,000. But this gives you a ballpark figure of how much money you could get back. So this, now look at the number above $61,000. So let's say you buy a $75,000 electric car, you'll get even more money back. Across Canada, the average between 12 and 18, almost $19,000. In Ontario, between $10,000 and $18,000. In New Brunswick, between $15,000 and $22,000. In Quebec, between $16,000 and $22,000. And PI, between $15,000 and $22,000. This is a lot of money that people are leaving on the table. So this is why I wanted to share this information with you, because no one had shared these numbers with anyone in Canada until today, until March 28th, actually, when we did that webinar. Let me give you two examples. If you buy a Nissan Leaf or a Nissan Ariya. So if you were to buy a Nissan Leaf in 2024, about $44,000, and you make 50 grand, you live in Ontario, you would get more than $9,000 back if you use the vehicle 70% of the time. This is a big deal. If you make 100 grand, it's more than $11,000. If you make 230 grand, you'd make almost $15,000. These are Ontario calculations, but this gives you an idea of how much money you could get back. If you were to buy the Nissan Ariya, and this one is the $75,000 version, and you use it 70% of the time for work, you are in Ontario, you would make anywhere between almost $10,000 to almost $18,000. So why don't people know about it? Well, honestly, beats me. I don't know if you know about this, but I've been talking to the federal government about this. I spoke to the folks from Transport Canada. I saw representatives of Transport Canada at the Gatineau EV show a year and a half ago, and they had a table where they explained to customers, people who were shopping for an electric car, how they could get up to $5,000 rebate when they purchased an electric car. And I asked them if they also talked about the fiscal deduction for self-employed workers, and they were not even aware of it. So that gives you an idea of how much work we have to do. So this is why I feel that this is important. But wait, there's more. If you look for a gas vehicle because you're self-employed and you're used to deduct, your expenses, and you own a gas car, what you'll see is that, well, if you are in Ontario and you buy a Honda Civic versus a Nissan Leaf, one is 36 grand, the other one is 44 grand, the Nissan Leaf, you'll get more than $5,000 more from the electric car than you would get from the gas car. So this is more saving. It means that it's more interesting financially to buy the electric car than to buy the gas car if you're self-employed. Obviously, this is not to mention the fact that the electric car will save you more money, from electricity, from maintenance and all that. But my point is that some people might say, yes, fiscal deduction for self-employed worker or business owners. You get it when you have a gas car. Well, when you have an electric car, it's even more money in your pocket. Keep in mind that the federal fiscal deduction stacks up with provincial rebates. So when I told you that I made $21,000 with my electric car in 2019, well, I added the $7,000 from the government of Quebec. So that means that I got $21,000 back by buying my electric car in Quebec. But if I would have been, let's say, in Ontario, I could have probably got approximately $20,000 back. So this is a big deal, especially in provinces where there are no rebates. And right now, there's only two left. There's only Saskatchewan and Alberta, now that we have a rebate in Manitoba. But wait, there's more. If you bought an electric car in 2023 and the electric car was above the $65,000 threshold for a car, or the $70,000 threshold for an electric light truck, meaning that you could not get the $5,000 rebate, you still can get in your income tax for 2023 the fiscal deduction. It's not too late. If you haven't done your income tax yet, you still can get it. And listen to this. In 2024, the fiscal deduction is at 75%. In 2023, it was more. Listen to this. Look at this. So let's say you bought a $75,000 EV. Keep in mind, at 75 grand, you cannot get a $5,000 rebate from the federal government. You use it 70% of the time for work, and you want to put it into your account, your income tax for 2023, take advantage of the fiscal deduction. Well, if you make 50 grand, instead of almost $10,000 that you could get in 2024, you'll get 12 for your 2023 income tax. Instead of, if you make 100 grand, instead of almost $13,000, you could get more than $16,000. And if you make $230,000 instead of $18,000 for 2024, you'll get more than 22 grand. This is a huge deal. So talk to your friends if they haven't been able to take advantage of the $5,000 rebate, or look at yourself. If you didn't get the $5,000, this is still available for your 2023 income tax. So this is why I really wanted to share this with you. To take advantage of the full fiscal deduction, a self-employed worker or a business must not use the $5,000 point of sale purchase rebate. This is very important, which means that if you go shopping right now for an electric car, because the vast majority of car dealers don't have a clue what we're talking about here, some of them will automatically check the box saying, yeah, $5,000 rebate. So if you put it into your contract and they deduct the $5,000 rebate, well, you can't get the fiscal deduction. So you have to make sure that in the contract you say, no, I won't take the $5,000. I will take the fiscal deduction because I am self-employed or I own a business. Let me give you an example. I have a friend of mine who asked me, how come there's no rebate for pickup trucks? And I called him and I said, you can't get a rebate. You can get actually the fiscal deduction because you own a business. He bought 2 pickup trucks. So I helped him. And then he talked to his accountant, and his accountant said, no, it doesn't work for you. Too complicated, blah, blah, blah. So I said, okay, so I will help you and we'll talk to my accountant. So my accountant helped him and he got $60,000 back from those 2 cars. So I told him that he owed me a big lunch. And I said, well, you might want to get rid of your accountant, because if he cost you $60,000 just on that, just imagine the rest. So my point is that some accountants don't know about this, are not interested in this. When I did the webinar last week, a person on the webinar said, well, I spoke to my accountant and he said that's too much paperwork. Well, too much paperwork, between us, my accountant didn't have a problem with making sure that I took advantage of the fiscal deduction. So this is why I'm talking to you about this. We have put all the information on our website at EMC. There's information on Clean Energy Canada's website that is shared as well. And I hope that the EV Society will share this, because this is too important for people not to take advantage of it. So there seems to be a question here.
Danielle, Chris Guernsey is going to take you through all the questions at the end so that you're not
Okay.
being interrupted, and then
Okay.
then we can put them all together, because you're answering some of the questions I see there already. So
Okay. Okay, perfect. So this to me is the big deal. The fiscal deduction is a big, big, big deal that no one knows about. So now let's talk about environment. I'm sure you've heard about the fact that a lot of people say electric cars are not that green, they're not that interesting. And depending on where you are, because if you are in Quebec or BC or Manitoba, the grid is so green that it's not a problem. But if you live in other provinces, not that big a deal, not that big a difference, or actually electric cars can be worse for the environment than comparable gas cars or hybrid cars or plug-in hybrid cars. This is stuff that I've heard, a lot, many times over the past couple of years. And actually, I had a car manufacturer saying to me that, well, if you live in Nova Scotia, might as well have a hybrid instead of a gas and instead of an electric car. I said, why? Well, because our grid is so dirty. Well, let's see some numbers here. So a few days ago, I happened to be testing the BMW i5 M6, a high performance electric car. And I made some calculations because actually this is what I do for a living, part of what I do, because I studied in climate change and life cycle analysis. So I compared GHG emissions with including battery manufacturing for the i5. So according to my calculations, after 20,000 kilometers, the footprint of the electric car had been amortized. In Quebec, it was after 18,600 kilometers. And after that, in Ontario, the BMW M4, the gas car, would emit 65 times more GHG emissions per kilometer driven than the electric car, the electric BMW. In Quebec, it's 1,225 times more GHG emissions per kilometer driven. So I heard recently that Ontario's grid has gotten a bit dirtier because they're using more natural gas now that they were 3, 4 years ago. Actually, the difference is not that great. Bit more natural gas, a bit more wind, a bit more solar, but the difference is not significant that it will make the gas vehicle cleaner than the electric vehicle ever. Now let's look at the worst case scenario. We're talking about Nova Scotia. So if you look at 2020 numbers from Natural Resources Canada, you see the numbers below. In 2020, GHG emissions per kilowatt hour in Nova Scotia was approximately at 650 grams per kilowatt hour. What people don't seem to realize or do not want to say or just don't know about is the fact that everywhere in the world, but it's in particular in Canada, you have seen that in Ontario, but we are seeing that in Nova Scotia, in other provinces in the US as well. The grid is getting cleaner and cleaner and cleaner as time goes by. So going from 650 grams per kilowatt hour in 2020, we're going to go down to, let's be conservative here, 117 grams in 2030 per kilowatt hour, meaning that the grid will have cleaned by approximately 80 to 90% between now and 2030. So if you were to buy an electric car in 2024 in Nova Scotia, so we're at 557 grams, and you keep the car for, let's say, 10 years. You do 15,000 kilometers a year. That's 150,000 kilometers. What that means is that at first, there won't be much of a difference in GHG emissions in the life cycle of the vehicle between a plug-in hybrid electric car like the Toyota Prius or an electric car. But that as the grid gets cleaner and cleaner and cleaner, then the difference works in favor of the electric car against the plug-in hybrid. So this is even in the worst case scenario that is Nova Scotia today. Keep in mind that the gas that we put in our vehicles is getting dirtier and dirtier and dirtier. Why is that? Very simple. When you live in Canada, not in all the provinces, but in most of the provinces in Canada, we get our gas from Canada or the US. And in 2022, more than 2/3 of oil production in Canada came from the oil sands. And what I've seen is from the Canadian Alliance of Oil Producers, CAPP, I don't remember exactly the name. They say that if you look at the whole life cycle of their vehicles, of their oil production, there's only a slight difference in GHG emissions compared to regular oil. But the thing is that when you take out the downstream emissions, meaning the emissions from the vehicle itself, and you look at the upstream emissions just from oil production and distribution, actually GHG emissions for production and distribution are 2.2 times higher from oil sands than it is from regular oil. Keep in mind that 97% of oil reserves in Canada are in the oil sands. So what this means is, as time goes by, the more we work towards getting more and more of our oil from unconventional sources like oil sands or shale oil, it means that the life cycle emissions of the whole vehicle gets dirtier because we're using less and less conventional oil that is being put into our vehicles. So on one end, oil production, oil distribution is getting dirtier because we get more and more unconventional oil in our vehicles. And on the other end, the electric grid is getting cleaner and cleaner and cleaner. Not to mention the fact that if you go back 5 years, the average GHG emissions per kilowatt hour for a battery electric vehicle was at approximately 10 kilograms per kilowatt hour for a battery. 100 kilograms, I'm sorry, 100 kilograms. Now we are seeing, because of new production facilities, more efficient ways of producing electric batteries for electric vehicles. We are going down slightly, so we're edging closer to 80 kilograms per kilowatt hour. And now we're moving towards 40 kilograms per kilowatt hour in some plants. And newer plants are coming to market. Newer batteries are coming to market with more efficient plants. And we will be, between now and 2030, going to 20 kilograms to 10 kilograms per kilowatt hour, especially when considering recycling. So what that means is that battery manufacturing is getting cleaner and cleaner and cleaner with time. The grid is getting cleaner everywhere in the world in time, from China to India, to Canada, to the US, while the oil that we put in our car is getting dirtier. So as time goes by, the difference is going to be even greater between gas cars and electric cars from a GHG point of view. From a natural resources waste point of view, I'm sure you've heard about this. When you look at the waste from a gas car compared to a waste from electric cars, there's about 300 to 400 times more waste, natural resources waste from a gas car than an electric car. Why? Because, well, the gas that you burn, not recyclable. The batteries are recyclable. Most of the car is recyclable. So this is a huge difference. This is why when I say that, when I see that people say, well, an electric car is not that green, it's not that perfect, it's not as green as people say. Actually, an electric car is not green, but it certainly is a lot less polluting than a gas car. So in the books that I've written in the past, I always say to people, do you absolutely need a car? Because if you don't buy one. This is the greener way to be going around town or being driven by friends. And the second question I ask people is, do you need that big a car? Because as you know, we seem to be a generation of truckers because everybody likes their light trucks today. So I'm doing interviews about that. I've written books about that. We need to have smaller electric cars. To me, my wife owns a Smart 42 electric. If today she had an accident, she could not buy a small electric car like the one she has now, because most car manufacturers are coming up with bigger and bigger and bigger electric cars. To me, this is the wrong way to go. We have to work very hard. I'm trying to convince the federal government, I'm talking to car manufacturers, to make sure that they bring some smaller electric cars, which we used to have a few years ago. But because of regulation, which is distorting the market in North America, we're talking about big cars in North America, we are having very little choice right now. When people, when I hear car manufacturers say, we're providing the cars that Canadians want. Actually, no, that's not the way it goes. They're pushing this on us, And the fact of the matter is that we need to have more smaller electric cars. Last but not least, I want to say a thing or two about the regulation. The federal government announced that they were adopting what we call the EV availability standard, which is the the other word for the ZEV mandate from the federal government. And what we are seeing right now with this mandate is that there's a lot of pushback from car manufacturers because, quote unquote, they don't want to be regulated. They want to do things their own way. But the fact of the matter is that for those of you who don't know about this, back in 2005, the federal government signed an agreement with the car manufacturers where they pledged that they would reduce their GHG emissions by 5.2 megatons between 2005 and 2010. Because there was no penalty, because there was no ties, no strings attached, they missed the target by 95%. So to say that the market will take care of itself, will take care of it itself, that's not true. Never did. Voluntary arguments, voluntary targets never worked before, and they won't work in the future. So this is an important topic. This is why I'm talking about the fact that if we want to reach our GHG emission targets, if we want to reach our EV regulation targets, we need to support the ZEV mandate from the federal government, just as we are supporting the BC government ZEV mandate and the Quebec ZEV mandate. And I would encourage, and I'm trying to get Atlantic provinces to adopt their own ZEV mandate because they are hearing that because of the fact that the federal government has adopted a general ZEV mandate across Canada, but that in Quebec and BC, they have their own ZEV mandate. A car manufacturer that sells an electric car in Quebec and BC will get one credit from the province and one credit from the federal, which means that it will be doubly incentivized to send their electric vehicles first and foremost in Quebec and BC. After that, Ontario, because this is a big market, and Atlantic Canada will be left with the crumbs. So this is a big problem. Keep in mind that if you look at GHG emissions per kilometer driven by the light-duty vehicle fleet in Canada, what we are seeing is that according to the International Energy Agency, a report they published 5 years ago, Canada was dead last in the world. We are the worst on GHG emissions per kilometer driven. So we can do a lot better than that. This is why we at EMC are pushing for regulation. We are pushing for subsidies. We are pushing also for education. What we just talked about regarding the financial incentive, it doesn't make sense that after 5 years of having this program, I'm here having to speak to you about this because no one knows about this. We need to push for more infrastructure, but let's face it, when I hear CVMA and GAC and other groups say, we won't be able to sell electric cars because we don't have enough infrastructure, I'm sorry, that's just plain false. We cannot say, well, we're not ready for 2035 because we should have 400,000 public chargers. Well, we are not in 2035. We have 11 years to go. It will keep growing as time goes by. And keep in mind that, yes, the federal government has to do its part, but the private companies have to do their part as well, just like Tesla did. Other car manufacturers have to invest in infrastructure. We have seen 7 car manufacturers saying last year that it would install 30,000 fast chargers across North America. So I can't wait to see them, but we're all in this together. But we cannot just rely on the federal government to do the job for them. So I hope this gives you an idea of where we have to be and how much work we need to do, because this is stuff that I've been working on for decades. And I'm very passionate about this because I believe that electric cars are not the solution, but they are a part of the solution. And I'm actually writing a book that's going to be out in the fall, both in English and French, to talk about myths about electric vehicles. And I am up to 50 myths, lies, and half-truths. So that gives you an idea of how much work we have to do educating people, educating media I'm sure you've heard about that. So much misinformation in the media to make sure that people understand that this is part of the solution. Not to mention the fact that we are doing an energy transition and a job transition in the electric vehicle industry. So a lot of information out there. I hope this is interesting to you. If you have any question, feel free to ask them. I'm here to answer them the best I can. Thank you.
Thanks, Danielle. That's awesome. Good information as always. Uh, and you're absolutely right to be focusing on greenhouse gas emissions. The other thing, though, I think gets lost in the conversation is straight out and out air pollution,
Absolutely.
and noise pollution. I remember that the only bright side of COVID was how fresh the air became in our area and how quiet it became out in the streets. And we don't talk about that enough either. I think that,
Tim,
the
Tim,
crisis is the crisis and it needs to get first attention, but
you
this
know
is
what?
important.
To your point, I absolutely agree, and I could have spoken about that because now some car manufacturers and some people in the media say that well, there's actually less air pollution now from gas vehicles and electric vehicles. That's stuff that I've heard, and actually, it's true that now with the new anti-pollution systems, they are becoming very efficient, but they are very efficient for the first few years. After that, as they get older, they pollute more and more and more, and it can increase significantly, exponentially after 5 years. So this is something that car manufacturers and some media don't want to talk about or they don't know about, because air pollution, anti-pollution system have a
Lifespan.
lifespan that is not 15 or 20 years old. It's between 5 and 10 years, between 120 and 160,000 kilometers. After that, they're not warranted. There's no guarantee on them. And then you have to pay to replace them, and most people don't.
Right, right. No, that's right. The mechanical combustion engine starts to get all loosey and worn as it gets older, and it pollutes more, and it also uses more fuel. It becomes less efficient. So
Yeah.
I'm going to ask Chris to join us. Chris has been monitoring the questions, and Chris, how about firing a couple at Danielle?
I can certainly do that. Okay, so the first question that we have, and we have been getting some thumbs up, so there's a few questions here that have been bumped to the top of the list, so thank you to people for that. The first question, why isn't our federal government holding to account provinces like Alberta who are completely misrepresenting the benefits of EVs in comparison to ICE vehicles?
Well, they are trying, but sometimes I feel that the Alberta government talks to their citizens as if they were besieged, by the federal government. That anything that the federal government would say is a lie. I remember when we were in Edmonton last fall for our annual conference at EMC, I had a conversation with uh, energy experts from Alberta. Listen to this. Energy experts from Alberta that were telling me that, you guys from Quebec, you'd rather take your oil from Saudi Arabia and Venezuela and Iran than from us. And I said to them, aren't you an energy expert? They said, yes, I've been at this for 20 years. And I said, and you still don't know that 100% of the oil that we get in Quebec comes from the US and Canada, that we get none of it from Venezuela, Iran, or Saudi Arabia? Said, why do you say that? I said, because that's the truth. Actually, when I was in government, we reversed the line 9B pipeline so that we could get our oil from Alberta. So when you have people who are speaking on behalf of the Alberta government or the industry that cannot even get their facts straight, so it's really complicated for us to have a conversation with the government. I remember Jason Kenney, speaking against Ontario and Quebec and where we were getting our oil from. And I know that in conversation that we are having these days, with some people who say, well, we should buy Canadian oil. I said, well, I wouldn't mind buying Canadian oil from Newfoundland. So why don't we get oil from Newfoundland and we get it from Alberta? It's because the oil companies in Newfoundland actually sign deals with Europe and the US to send it there instead of in Canada. So are you saying to me, as a more conservative a person, that you would oblige the oil companies to send their oil first and foremost to Canada? I don't get an answer for that. They don't answer it. So to me, this is a warped conversation.
Definitely, definitely. Next question. How will car dealers earn their income in the future if not from maintenance and repairs?
Well, this is one of the reasons why some car manufacturers want to get rid of dealers. Because they're saying that, you know, if the money that you're making is mainly from maintenance, the business model won't hold. And let's be honest here. I have some of my friends who are dealers, and they have adjusted to the fact that electric cars were being sold more and more. There's less and less maintenance, but there still is some maintenance. I'm old enough to remember back in the day that you had to change your oil every 2,000 miles. Remember that, Tim?
Absolutely.
You know, and then we had to change the carburetor and I had to change all these things. Even the gas cars need less and less maintenance now than they did 20, 40 years ago. So if a car dealer says, no, I need the business, well, your business model is not working. And some of my friends, I have a friend of mine, 45% of their sales are electric cars now. So they know where it's headed and they're making good money. They're making a good living. So to me, I think it has more to do with the fact that people resist change.
Fair point. Next question. Why are the automakers of EVs not actively promoting the advantages of owning an EV to prospective customers in their TV commercials?
Well, some of them are because they invest in advertising. And I see, you know, it's funny because sometimes I live in Quebec, keep that in mind, okay? And if you want to get your hands on a Hyundai Ioniq 5, it's going to take you a couple of years in Quebec with regulation. And I still see advertisement from the Ioniq 5, but people can buy them. They can't get their hands on them. So they do put some advertisement on for electric cars, but the fact of the matter is that it's one thing to advertise on TV, but it's quite another to talk about them when you are at the dealer. I know two car manufacturers a few years ago that hired people to do some mystery shopping, and they went to see the dealers. And when the mystery shopper went to the dealer and asked them, I would like to get a greener car. I'd like to get a greener car. What do you suggest? And they offered electric cars at the dealers. And 9 times out of 10, the person would be directed to a gas car. Some other mystery shoppers asked the question as followed. They said, I'd like to buy an electric car. I think that's fair enough, you know? And 4 times out of 5, the person would redirect the shopper to a gas car. So there's quite a bit of resistance from some salespeople when it comes to gas cars. And that's across North America. So the car dealers, as far as I'm concerned, is part of the roadblock to electric vehicles. It is part of the problem. We have been training dealers for years. I've been training dealers for 10 years now. And there are so many misconceptions that people have. And there's also a bit of machism in there. Not to mention that some people are not very comfortable with new technologies. So they'd rather talk solely about, you know, car payments and options and bucket seats and, you know, a longer warranty and stuff like that. But when it comes to technology, you know, I often say that, you know, when my father was still alive, he wanted nothing to do with computers. But the fact of the matter is that today, if you are to work anywhere, you need to be able to deal with a computer. You have to be able to work with the computer. It's a tool. But some people are not comfortable with new technologies. So some people resist it, but they don't want to admit that they're not comfortable.
I think I'm going to just jump in and say, but some people genuinely aren't comfortable. That's a fair thing
Absolutely.
too, and we have to. I think too, we have to be uh, a little bit sensitive and maybe even dedicate resources to the people who are are going to be disrupted by this transition, whether that's a dealer, someone who works at a dealership or in the oil industry. We need to help. It's not the everyday worker and even middle management that really are responsible. It's very high up, and
Tim,
government.
Tim, my mother is 87 years old.
Hmm.
She had a plug-in hybrid electric car. She's selling it. She's getting another plug-in hybrid electric car because sometimes she forget to plug the car.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
she hates computers, and she's been working somewhat on a computer for 30 years. And for 30 years, every second or third week, I would go to her and she'd say, well, it doesn't work, you know, and then I'd push on the button and it would work. She was never comfortable with the computers. So she's not very comfortable with her plug-in hybrid electric car, but at least sometimes she will plug it in and sometimes she will forget. So I get it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I would say as well, I find it, I think it's unfortunate that the market seems to have shifted very quickly away from plug-in hybrids in some ways. Like there's less of them now than there was a while ago. Like Chevy canceled the Volt without a replacement. That in a lot of cases, I think that plug-in hybrids are probably still a very viable option for a lot of people. And would certainly help those who are struggling with the transition more than others.
And between us, can I be very blunt here? To me, for those who are worried about, buying an electric car and they want to go to plug-in hybrid, to me, this is the gateway drug. Once you get a plug-in hybrid, you want to go electric.
I've had several people over the last number of years who bought hybrids brag to me that I drove my car for 6 months and the gas engine never came on once. And I said, well, that's too bad. That means you've been hauling around a gas engine that you're going to have to maintain that affected your range for no reason. And the
Exactly.
other thing I hear people say, which I think is kind of clever, a little bit of a barb, but saying that hybrids really are the worst of both worlds.
Yeah.
They got a small battery that won't go that far with a gas engine,
Yeah.
that pollutes and needs maintenance. But I'm saying all this in a kind of
But I
a
get it. Yeah, but I get it. That's for some people, plug-in hybrids. I mean, I live in rural Quebec, and I hear so many times that when you live in rural Canada, you cannot buy an electric car. Actually, it's easy to have an electric car when you live in rural Canada because I don't know anybody in Saint Ignace de Loyola where I live, that lives in a high tower, high rise building. There's no high rise building here. Only, little cottages and little houses with a driveway or a garage. When you have a driveway or a garage, there's nothing easier than to have an electric car and you plug it in at home. There's nothing easier. And it's the same across Canada. So when you're talking about, the fact that people living in rural Canada cannot have an electric car, well, worst comes to worst, you can always get a plug-in hybrid if you're worried about, not getting enough range because you live so far away from any public charger, then you get a plug-in hybrid. But for the vast majority of Canadians living in rural Canada, battery electric, not a problem at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as someone who lives in rural Ontario, I would generally tend to agree with your statement. I have a plug-in hybrid, but that's because our situation, we live quite a ways away from town. There is not a lot of infrastructure around us, and we do travel beyond the infrastructure that is available quite regularly. So for us, it's a great solution.
Yeah.
But for a lot of people who live closer to town where we live, there's a lot of EVs. They're all over the place.
Yeah.
And people live outside of town. They charge them at home and that's all they really need. So yeah.
I've heard that many times. We live in a big country, as if I knew anyone that woke up in Halifax to go to work in Vancouver with their car. It's not because we live in a big country that we do that much mileage. According to StatsCan in 2016, 91% of Canadians drove 35 kilometers or less to go to work on a daily basis. And then I looked at some data, I don't know if you've seen that. There's some that I dug up a few months ago where I found out that in Canada, people drive approximately 20% less in 2019 than in 2000. So that means that we're at approximately 15,000 kilometers a year. And even in Alberta, we're closer to 13,000 kilometers a year. And then I compared that to Norway. And people say, well, Norway is such a small country. Well, actually, with their EVs, they drive approximately the same amount of mileage in a year than people in Alberta. And they say, yeah, but Norway's small. It doesn't make a difference. If people drive 15,000 kilometers a year, and Norway's not an island, they can go to Sweden, they can go to Finland, they can go elsewhere. No big deal. But we had this idea that because it's a big country, we drive so much more, but it's not the case at all.
Shall we go to the next question?
Yeah.
This one is very much for you specifically, but we've had several upvotes on it, so I think it's a good one to ask. How may we get on a list to order your new book?
Oh, wait a minute. We didn't discuss commission rates or anything here.
Actually, we haven't thought about this yet. I have to finish writing the book. I'm supposed to be finished in a week and a half, but it's gonna be ready if all goes according to plan at our conference in Halifax in September of 2024, and it's gonna be available online for purchase in English or French. But I'll keep you posted with the details.
Excellent. Next question. Is there a deduction when a business buys a used EV?
No, it doesn't work for used. It only works for new EVs or PHEVs.
Okay. It has been my personal experience that dealerships rarely, if ever, stock new EVs on their respective lots, contrary to the wishes of our federal government. As such, how are potential customers to embrace EVs when they rarely, if ever, get to see or ride in one?
That's a great question. Well, the purpose of the ZEV mandate, the EV availability standard that the federal government calls it, is exactly for that, to make sure that dealers will get more supply and they will sell more cars. Keep in mind that car manufacturers send their vehicles first and foremost to regulated markets. That's how it works. So when they look at the world, they say, okay, so we have to sell that many EVs here, that many EVs there, and we don't have any regulation in this country. So they will send the electric cars first and foremost, in Norway and in Sweden and in France and in Great Britain and in Germany and in China and in California and the 15 other ZEV states and in Quebec and BC. I don't know if you know about this, but back in 2011, for those of you who don't know about this, in 2011, in Ontario, there was the assembly of the Toyota RAV4 EV. The federal government and the Ontario government both gave $70 million to Toyota to assemble the Toyota RAV4 EV. Back then, there was an $8,000 rebate for the purchase of an electric car. Even though there was a rebate, because there was no regulation or nothing forcing car manufacturers to sell them in Quebec or Canada or Ontario for that matter, 100% of these cars were sent to regulated markets in the US. So it's crazy that taxpayers' money would go to assemble a vehicle that they could not purchase in their own country. So that's why this ZEV mandate, keep in mind that as Canadians, we are investing billions of dollars in battery plants and assembly plants. It would be crazy if, let's say, the Conservative government was to win. They took away the regulation, and all these cars and batteries that are being manufactured in Canada would be sent elsewhere because we don't have regulation. That'd be a shame.
It would indeed. What about leasing a car? Is federal money only for outright purchase?
It's mostly for purchase. There's another program that I'm not familiar with for the lease of a vehicle, but I could get back to you on that. But it's not as interesting as if you buy an electric car or a plug-in hybrid electric car.
Okay. Will hydrogen ever prove viable for consumer vehicles? I have my own personal
short
opinion
answer,
on this, but I would like to hear yours.
Short answer is no. I started getting interested in hydrogen electric cars 50 years ago this year, 1974. Back in the day, I was reading Popular Mechanics and Science EV and other magazines, and I was very interested in hydrogen cars. I remember when I went to university, we were talking about hydrogen cars, and what we are seeing is that where there's very little progress in hydrogen, there's a lot of progress on battery electric cars. So that this is why we are seeing dismal sales number across North America for hydrogen cars. Actually, the two least sold vehicles in Canada are two hydrogen cars, the Mirai and the Nexo from Hyundai. So no, it's not going to happen. There might be a business case for, heavy duty vehicles for long hauls, but as batteries get better and better, the technology is getting cheaper and cheaper. There's less and less room for hydrogen. Actually, I would say that there's more room for hydrogen technology for industry than there is for transportation.
Yeah, it's
And keep in
it's that darn physics, right? It just keeps getting in the way. It's so expensive and not,
Exactly, and keep in mind that more than 95% of the hydrogen produced right now comes from natural gas, meaning that it's not that green at all. But if you make it from renewable, it takes so much energy that with the same amount of energy that you need to propel a hydrogen car, you can propel 3 electric cars.
yeah, yeah.
So it would be a monumental waste, of energy and electricity if we were to go hydrogen for all the fleet of light duty vehicles.
Yeah. Chris, I think we could squeeze in one more quick question and then we'll have to wrap.
Okay. It's an interesting question. Plug-in hybrid cars in Europe have been studied to have about 3 times higher CO2 emissions compared to their stated emissions.
Yes.
Is this due to not plugging in and charging the battery, or if not, what do you think that's due to?
It's due to the fact that a lot of people are not plugging their electric vehicles as often as they should. But in Canada, I expect things to be worse because when you live in Canada in very cold weather, let's say minus 15 degrees or below, even if your battery is full, the gas car will start anyway. So will produce GHG emissions that will pollute because most of them are programmed to have the gas engine start at minus 10 or minus 15. So in Canada, in very cold weather, actually, you're not driving a plug-in vehicle, you're driving a gas vehicle that's carrying a battery. So it's very inefficient in very cold weather. And so this is why, to me, the plug-in hybrids are not that efficient, especially when you live in Canada.
I can speak to that personally. The plug-in hybrid that I have, if the weather is above zero, we'll say, I will use up my entire battery on my way to work, and then fortunately I'm able to charge at work, and then it gets me almost all the way home. But
Yeah.
I use the whole battery. In the winter, when it was really, really cold, I would get to work and the engine would start up right away, and I would get to work and I would have used about half of the battery.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm still using battery, but not nearly as much as when the weather is warmer. So that's absolutely true.
Great, great. Well, Daniel, thanks so much for coming on and doing the webinar with us and providing that information. We'll be sure to talk it up, I think, with our friends and family now that we have it.
Yeah.
And it helps just to keep everybody informed about the benefits. These are benefits that are often missed and overlooked. And also appreciate the work that you do at EMC. I know you're tireless, you never stop, and you just do such a great job for the industry. It's deeply appreciated.
I thank you very much for saying that. I work very hard. I work with a passion, and I have a great team working with me, and we want to keep doing the good work because we're all in this together. Let's face it, and I want to say once again how much I am impressed by the work that you guys do at EVS.
No, thank you, thank you. And Chris, thank you as always for doing your part with the webinar. We appreciate you managing through those questions. That's very helpful. I'd like to thank the audience as well.
Yeah.
Lots of good questions and just for showing up and keeping our webinar so well. We had, I think, 138 people at one time and somewhere close to 300 people had registered, so that we'll see lots of uptake on the recording of this, which you'll be able to find on our YouTube playlist. So thank you all very much for that. Just a few comments about next month. Next month on Canada Talks Electric Cars, we'll be talking about a very topical subject, which is autonomous vehicles and specifically the safety of autonomous vehicles, self-driving cars. Joining us for that episode will be a fellow by the name of Philip Koopman. He's associate professor at Carnegie Mellon University, and he's an internationally recognized expert on autonomous vehicle safety. So it should be a very interesting webinar indeed. Remember to mark the date. That will be on Tuesday, May 7 at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time. So on behalf of all of us at EV Society, thank you for joining today's webinar, and we'll wrap it up. This will conclude the webinar for today.